This is an interview with Mr. Samuel Greenwood for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Today is November 14th, year 2000. Mr. Greenwood, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and welcome to the Institute.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Were you born in Birmingham?
Yes, I was.
Were your parents from Birmingham originally?
No, originally they were from Columbus, Georgia.
Columbus. Oh, okay. How many brothers and sisters?
No brothers and no sisters.
All right. Only child?
Only child.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much education did your parents have?
I would say absolutely none. No.
What kind of work did they do?
Well, my mother worked at a Chinese restaurant on about 3rd Avenue and 17th Street. And my father, I never knew my father until I was about 17, 18 years old. He left Birmingham when I was just 6 months old.
Oh, okay. Where did he go?
He went to Chicago.
Oh, okay. So you were born what year?
February the 14th, 1920.
February 14th, 1920.
Yes.
Those are some tough times.
Oh, they
right
were
after
tough.
the war.
Yes.
And that period, of course, in 1919 in Birmingham, they had what was called lynching bees, where they would actually lynch people, lynch black folk, and it would be a festive occasion. So I'm sure it was a tough time.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me what do you remember about those first days in Birmingham?
There were 3 incidents in my life that I shall never forget. And among those were the fact that in our little neighborhood there at 1621 and 3rd Avenue South, dirt roads and seeing the hooded riders come through our neighborhoods at night many times, swinging from the running boards of Chevys or Fords, with the shotguns in one hand, holding on to in the other. And I remember those times. And there were times that they would run through our house and without knocking, mothers undressed.
Run through your house.
Yeah, that's right. We kids, when we see a white policeman, we knew that he was a policeman, and we ran. And running into the house, they thought we was trying to tell somebody about the whiskey or whatever that they might have had. That's what they're always looking for.
Right.
But they're looking for it because of the fact that the white policemen were competing against each other for selling whiskey in our neighborhoods. And they want to know who's selling it to whom over here, and they had different people telling them these things, and as a result, we were always...
To get the kickback.
Yes, right, to get the kickback. And in fact, there was an incident that happened where one of the policemen killed another white policeman because of vying for this trade of whiskey in the black neighborhoods.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Well, about what year was that?
Oh, this must have been about 1928, 29, or something like that. Yeah.
And you had different segments of the police force making the effort to control.
Right. Oh, yes, sir. And these police would come with the white robes on through our neighborhoods, but underneath the robes would be their police uniform. I mean, they didn't try to hide too much from us. They didn't care. And I do remember on the 4th of July, an old biplane would come over the black neighborhoods and drop exploding hand grenades. And it would explode before they hit the ground, but it would frighten us to death. I mean, and that was the kind of intimidation that went on in our neighborhoods, along with everybody who had on a uniform. If it was white, he was your boss. He was the person to tell you what to do. We paid our money sometime on the bus or the trolley car, and the car is crowded with people, with whites, and we have to go around to the back door, and sometimes we take off without getting on the car. But there were so many things that happened. Go ahead.
Yeah. Where did you start first grade? What school?
The first school in Birmingham for blacks, Cameron. Cameron School was on Avenue H and 14th Street.
Okay. It was Cameron Lane eventually.
Oh, eventually. Yes, sir. That's correct.
And what do you remember about that school?
Well, I remember about it that we had to bring the coal in from the coat from the back there and start the fire in the morning. We had to go outside the door into the bathroom, and it's cold sometime. And one of the most vivid things that I recall is the fact that every year we got books. The white books, white schools. The backs torn off of them, pages missing, but this is what they gave us. We gave us those old books.
The books from that the whites had used the previous year.
They got new books and we got their old book. Yes.
How far did you live from Cameron?
Oh, I lived about 8 blocks from Cameron.
Okay. And how did you get back and forth to school?
Yes.
How did you get back and forth to school?
Oh, Lord. I had to walk. In fact, I moved to what they call Titusville at that time, and I was still living at 1621 3rd Avenue South, and I had to walk over there, and it was nothing, to Titusville, to Center Street. Right. I had to walk.
Yeah. Yes. That's quite a distance from Center Street.
Right, it is.
Yeah. Now, Birmingham in the 1920s and 30s, there were a number of things going on. One of the things that was going on is the whole issue, of course, the issue of race, but also the issue of working class history and people, the attempt to develop unions.
Oh, yes.
When you left Cameron, before we get to that, when you left Cameron, where did you go?
I left Cameron and I went to Titusville, because I lived out there for a while and then moved back to the South Side. Okay. Then I was going to the Washington School there. Okay. Yeah.
All right. And where did you go to high school?
I didn't go to high school in Birmingham.
Okay.
No. In fact, I didn't go to high school at all. In fact, I came out of the service and I got a GED and went to some of the city colleges there and got a little bit here and a little bit there.
Okay. So when you finished your schooling, you then went into service?
No. I went into service when let me see if I can get this straight now. Yeah. I went into service in December the 5th of 41.
Oh, okay.
All right. But in the meantime...
You were 21 years old at that time.
Yes.
What did you do between the time that did you go to work?
Well, my mother passed when I was about 12 or 13 years old. Okay. And I had to go from one relative to the other. And they got tired of me. I had to go to another relative. So I went around to different places. I went to New York City, Connecticut, Chicago with different relatives.
Oh, I see.
And
so you were away from Birmingham then?
Yeah, I was away from Birmingham then. I left Birmingham, I guess, about 13 or 14, somewhere in that area. Right. But
well, when you left Birmingham, where did you go? Did you go to New York?
I went to Chicago. I went to Chicago.
With your father?
Chicago, I never saw my father until I got to Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And but, that was with another relative?
Yes, right.
And how long were you there?
Oh, I was there for, I guess, maybe a couple of years before I went to New York and Connecticut.
Did you go to school there?
Yes, I went to school for a while in New York City, with Benjamin Franklin High School, 79th and 3rd Avenue in New York. But my background was such that I just couldn't keep up with them. I just couldn't.
Right.
So these different places I went, like Connecticut, I went to one of the highest little villages in the country. I mean, as far as wealth is concerned.
Right.
Torrington, Connecticut, and I just couldn't
keep up.
I couldn't keep up with them.
Yeah.
I didn't have the background.
So what did you do? How did that impact upon you as a youngster?
I felt terrible about it because I couldn't, and I came back to New York City and bombed around because my aunt, who came and got me who was responsible for my leaving the South, she was working for some people in domestic,
right,
and she was doing the best she could for me. In fact, she got me out of the South, she said, because she wanted me to do this, but it was kind of hard. But after leaving Connecticut, I was on my own, and I was going from pillar to the post and trying to make it.
Right.
Working in stores or wherever I could. Yeah. And then eventually I went back to Chicago.
There was a lot of opportunity for young black men at that time to get involved in things that were illicit? I mean,
oh yes,
was that
quite. Yes,
a possibility for you? I mean,
well, I don't know.
Maybe
that little background that I had in Birmingham, Alabama, you know, trying to do the right thing, or being always told, and everybody was your parent. You know, when you lived in the neighborhood, everybody was your parent, and they saw you doing something wrong, and maybe that held over because I never went to jail, only in the Army.
This period again was the 30s, 40s, particularly in say like New York, Chicago, there were the communist movement was right.
Right.
And were you ever involved? Did you know people that were involved in any of those areas?
Yes. In fact, I had a cousin who in Chicago, and he went to California, and he was definitely involved with the communist movement. In fact, he had a little theater group, and I went to his group, and I met a lot of communists, but I never was one to take out a card or anything like that. But I was around them. Yes. In fact, during that time, in New York City, and I'm jumping over, but Father Divine was up and going.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about that. Did you ever attend his meetings?
Oh yes, Father Divine was a godsend for a while. There was because of the fact that we could go to Father Divine and pay 15 cents for a meal, and he had the women. The women were going as domestic. They had a big building they lived in, just the women. And they go every morning and go to the domestic. Men had a big building by themselves over here, but it was all Father Divine. And the money that he got, he had a big mansion in New Jersey, and he married a young white girl. But for a while there, he fed the people. He fed us.
Did you ever meet him?
I only got close to him once. I was coming from someplace, I don't recall where, but there were women around a Duesenberg. It was a Duesenberg. And these women were lying over the Duesenberg, and they were praying and moaning and carrying on. And I said, what's going on? They said, this is Father Divine's car. He's in there getting a haircut, one of his places getting a haircut. But he was quite a character.
So he was... Yes, Father Divine, Daddy Grace doing.
Yes, all that time. Yes.
The A. Philip Randolph in developing his Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and many times, many of these movements, they were termed to be other than American, anti-American in a sense. And I know in the South, anyone that talked about racial equality, in many cases they would turn communist.
Right, of course.
Inspired. But the communists had a relatively good record when it came to egalitarian movements and helping the poor and that kind of thing. So they were rather attractive. Did you see that as being the case with them? The attraction, was the attraction based upon them being helpful to the community?
I think I think most people had that idea that they were helpful because what we were going through when I was a kid in Birmingham, Alabama, and Doctor, I want you to know that there were some trying times when at once a month, when I was a kid there in Birmingham, you went to the welfare store. You had a little booklet there, and they would give you some food. Well, and after 2 weeks, the food would run out. And we just wished that we had somebody to help us. I mean, communists or whatever, you know.
Anybody.
I mean, just anybody to help give us food because, as I said, that was a trying time. And the people on the first of the month, they would come like people down a little rivulets going into a big stream, going to First Avenue and 14th Street where the big welfare place was. And we were in line standing there. Old people with cripple, pulling baby buggies or wagon, whatever they could to put the little food that they're going to get on there. And it was quite a sight. It was quite something. And I know that you would ask whether you were communist or whatever you were, if they could help you, you know.
It didn't matter.
Didn't matter, really.
Right. What was the transition like for you leaving Birmingham, small southern city, to the megapolis of New York?
Well, at that time, I wasn't sophisticated enough to really see the difference, but there was a difference. But it was underhanded. I mean, here in Birmingham, you knew just where to stand or where to go. They have to kick you out some places. You would try to go in the north there in Chicago, but Chicago had a line. There was a demarcation line there that you didn't step over it, because during that time, the police was just almost as bad as they were in Birmingham. But maybe it wasn't quite that obvious, but they were something else.
Yeah.
Wherever we went.
Yeah.
Wherever I went, whether it was New York, Connecticut, or wherever.
Yeah. So it was not
the panacea that I thought.
Yes. Had you anticipated any difference?
Well, yes, I anticipated that there would be difference, but you have to be there a while, because the fact that, in the 20s, was it the 20th? They had the big race riot there in
1919.
Right. They're on the beach there.
Right.
Kill a young boy.
That's right.
But the police, they weren't quite as rabid as they were here, because here, everybody who had on a uniform, whether it's a policeman, whether it's a fireman, whether it's an ambulance driver, if he had on a uniform, he was your boss. Yeah. Birmingham, you had to say yes sir, no sir.
Yeah, many times, even if they didn't have on uniforms.
Right, really. If they didn't have on a uniform.
They were white.
That's right.
Boss. Yes.
Really.
What was the circumstances of your meeting your father in Chicago?
Well, that was kind of an embarrassing moment, because we were suffered so. I mean, you're talking about, we were the poorest of the poor. And my father I didn't even know him until I was about 14 or 17 years old. And it was kind of, I never felt that he was my father. Although I was around him for a short time. Right. And I was, but wasn't no father.
You just never,
I never felt that love. No, sir. Never had that feeling as a father. Because I feel as though if he had been a father, he would have tried to see about me, or right my mother. My mother struggled, and she died at a very young age.
At the age of 21, then was it 21 or so, you went into the military?
Right, I went to the military from Chicago.
From Chicago.
Yeah, right.
What was that experience like?
Well, let me put it this way, Doctor. I dug every outhouse it was from America to North Africa, Italy, Germany, and France, because I just thought that somewhere along the line I woke up and said, look, I'm a soldier in the United States Army. I'm about to get killed for the country, and they treat us the way they did. We slept in pup tents, while down the road there, the other white soldiers slept in perennial tents there, and it rained in North Africa. During the winter time, just rain. And we had some boys that I'd give him my half of the tent, and we'd put it together and make a pup tent, and his feet would be sticking out in the rain. And nobody cared. We had what you call mattress covers, and we'd go out in the farmer's field and get straw and put it in there to sleep on. And down the road there it was rough.
So again, it wasn't a panacea.
Oh,
when
Lord,
you arrived in the military.
No, sir. In fact, Doctor, I was over where the 332nd Fighter Group was. I was a service company with trucks. We serviced the 52nd Fighter Group, which was white, and the 332nd Fighter Group, which was black. The 99 Pursuit Squadron started out over there. Okay. I used to look up in the mornings at Ramatelli Airfield, that's where we were in Italy, and see the big bombers going over first. Then about an hour later, the P-51s, which our black boys were piloting. Right. They would go with the bombers to protect the bombers after they dropped the bombs, But the 52nd Fighter Group, they would go also over. But they would leave the bombers and go try to find German aircraft to shoot down. But the black guys stayed with them all the way there and back. But once they got back to Italy, the black pilots could not go to the service club. They could not go to the White Officers Service Club. The British officers allowed them to go to their club. So, and that mentality kind of just made me be a corporal all the way through. Just enough not to do the dirtiest work, but...
So they could go to, the British would allow them, they couldn't go to their own service.
They couldn't go to their own service club. Now, why I know that? Because the fact that the neighbor in my older years, where he just died this past year, was a pilot in the 332nd. We were neighbors. I lived on the 3rd floor in a place called Chatham Village Co-op in Chicago, and he lived on the 1st floor. I saw his children grow up and marry, and Kirkpatrick was his name. Well, and he told me this, and he was a pilot. In fact, he was 25 years old, and he said he was the oldest man in the group, one of the oldest men in the group at the time, from Tuskegee.
Right, yeah. That's, that is something that you had to go through all of that, although you were fighting for democracy around the world.
That got to me, Doctor. That really got to me. And the white officers would sell us cigarettes. Now, cigarettes was only 5 cents a pack when we first started out. Then they got to 10 cents or 20 cents or whatever. But over in Europe and in Africa, we could sell a pack of cigarettes for $20. Now, the white officers would give us what they call the 20 grams or wings or some of these cheap smoking cigarettes, tasting, and they were awful. And we knew that they treated us this way, but they did everything in the world to us. And I just rebelled against it. So I was always digging in the outhouses because that was my extra duty.
Were there others that rebelled in the same manner?
Very few.
Very few.
Very few of them. Yeah, very few.
So you were somewhat of an outcast.
Well, I was. I was, and when you're speaking of outcasts, he called me, the officers called me out one day, had the whole company come out, like 126 men. And I stood in front there, and he says, he told my company, he says that all the problem we're having is because of this guy here, so he could be the first sergeant if he wanted to, but they stayed on me. I went from North Africa to Italy 3 times. But the fighting was so fierce in Italy at that time that I had to come back on old DC-4 and back and forth. But they wouldn't let me stay one place. They wanted me to go with the company. They wanted me to go with the officer who said that I was raising all this sand. I stayed with him.
Why would they send you with him?
Because he didn't want me to be back there with the rest of the company.
He didn't want you to...
No, he didn't.
You would create problems.
Right.
When he's
really.
gone.
And but the fighting, the roads were so that in Italy at that time, the fighting was just outside of Naples, and the roads were so full of troops going up and troops coming down until we couldn't have a truck company there. So I went back to North Africa, and eventually the fighting was such that we did come back to Italy there, and that's where I met the 332nd Fighter Group guys.
How long did you stay in the military?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years the first time. 2 years the second time, from 50 to 52.
Okay. When you got out of the military the first time, what did you do? Did you go back to Chicago?
I went back to Chicago. Yes, sir.
And did you work? Did you find a job?
Well, I found a job, but it was just a menial job at a hotel there. Then I came back to Birmingham. Yeah, I came back to Birmingham about 47.
Okay.
About 47, right, and started working for Eastern Airlines.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And you were here for what, a couple of years?
A couple of years, yes. I was here until 50. I was working for Eastern Airlines and looked across the field there and saw the Army Reserve. And I said, this is so boring here. And I joined the Army Reserve. Stayed in about 6 months and called active duty for Korea. But I didn't go to Korea. So when I got out, instead of coming back to Birmingham, I stayed in Chicago.
Okay. Now, when you returned to Birmingham, I know many of the soldiers that went away and came back, particularly many of those from the South, and I'm sure from the North as well. When you return, you find many times that the conditions, you were supposedly fighting for democracy for the world, but you come back and you find the conditions are just as bad as when you left.
Absolutely.
How did that impact upon you?
Well, I don't know, because I had such a lady who was my grandmother, who acted as grandmother, or who was just a friend, but she tried to help me even when my mother was living. And for her, I was just trying to do the best I could for her. And I accepted it, I mean, and when I think back over it, I mean, there was so sophistication, prejudice and racism was so sophisticated, not so sophisticated in Chicago, but it was known here. You knew where you stood, I mean, But
well, you went back in the military then in what?
I would in '50. Mm-hmm. I went because I was working for Eastern Airlines, and in '50 I went in and stayed 2 years. Mm-hmm. And
had the military changed in it? Because by then, Truman had.
Oh yes, it had.
Service supposedly was integrated
right.
now.
You're right. I'm glad you make that point, Doctor, because of the fact that I got into a headquarters company, and we had about 7 or 8 trucking companies under us. Now each company had about 126 men, and a lot of them were white companies. Mm. And this was that new thing that how said the Army is no longer segregated, but we had a few trouble, little problems there, trying to being over headquarters company, tell them where to go or what to do.
What kind of problems did you encounter?
Well, most of the problems were with the officers, with our officers trying to tell the white officers of these different companies that they had to do what we say. But as far as enlisted men, we didn't have any problem with them, mm-hmm. right? Because it was all cut and dried, so,
But you recognize that there had been a change from when you were in before?
I don't know whether it was that obvious or not. I don't know what is that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And after you then served your time, and you got out of the military this time, where did you go?
Out of the military this time, I went back to Chicago. Okay. I went back to Chicago because I had put in an application for a bus driver in the city of Chicago. And after this length of time that I stayed in the Army, and when I came back, did I come back here? I'm not sure, Doctor, but anyway, I was called back to Chicago as a bus driver. Okay. Right. Okay. And I drove the bus after that, I drove the bus for about 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, in the 50s, things are happening. You had the Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Oh, yes.
And then the movement starts, the Montgomery bus boycott. Mm-hmm. Did that have any impact? Were you following that during that time?
Oh, yes, we were. We were following it that time, and I'm trying to think whether or not what kind of impact it did have on me. I know I was always obvious of what was going on as far as racism was concerned, and I never hesitate to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But trying to make it, I guess, with your own problems, you know what I'm saying? Sure. And I had sympathy, but I don't know what I did for the movement. I don't even remember what I did for the movement, but
yeah. But you were aware that things were taking place.
And I've always regretted why didn't I do something. But Doctor, I left here in uniform in Birmingham, and I remember a Look magazine guy was on the street at Birmingham, somewhere on 20th Street and 5th Avenue, wherever. But I was in uniform. He says, "How do you feel about?" Because that was during the movement time there. He says, "How do you feel about wearing a uniform in Alabama, the way that they're being treated?" And I don't know what my reply was at that time. I don't remember.
This is you said Newsweek?
It was either Look magazine or
one of the national publications.
Yeah, it was a national publication, right? Right.
But he did raise that question.
He did raise that question, and I don't know what answer I gave him. I don't recall. Right.
But during the time that the struggles were taking place here, let's say between 56 and maybe 65, what was happening in Chicago?
Well, we had our own problems. There were racism. The police department was still run by Mayor Daley, and whatever the police did, that's the same way it is now. But we didn't have the officers like you. We didn't have the officers because they were just getting into. At that time, they were just getting into the police. I mean, they had worked as a policeman, but no big rank, because all the rest of those guys had tenure. They had the white officers, So we were struggling. We were struggling here. We were struggling in Chicago. We had our problems there, trying to get jobs, because at that time we were trying to fight to get counter jobs for women in the big department stores. Right.
So at that time you were driving bus?
I was driving the bus, yes, sir.
And you drove the bus for what, 7, 8 years?
About 7 or 8 years.
And then what did you do after that?
After that, let's see, what did I do? I left the bus and I started as a salesman for a cosmetic company. Yeah.
Was this an effort to do something to elevate yourself economically?
But it was. That's what I tried to do. In fact, I had a truck. I bought a truck and I sell directly to the beauty shops over the city of Chicago. Okay. But they didn't have the type of business that the whites had, because if you were in a white shop, the owner bought all the supplies and they took the money that way. But in black shops, each operator did their own thing, and they didn't have much money. They couldn't buy the supplies, and I was just spinning my wheels and trying to create a business there. Right. But it wasn't successful.
How long did you last?
I stayed there about 3 or 4 years, trying to make it.
Uh-huh. And Chicago, now you're talking about the mid-'60s. Were you there in '68 during the convention, Chicago?
Oh, yes.
Democratic Convention?
Yes. Yeah, when Brother Daley beat us up so?
Right.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't recall. Yeah, I remember seeing it on TV, in the papers there, whatever. But yeah, that was quite something. Yeah. But that mostly white was involved. Mostly white young.
White kids, and they had, of course, they had the Chicago 8 trial at the time, and Bobby Seale was a part of that.
That's right. They came over there on the west side and shot him up and killed him shot through the walls. Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, were leaders in the Black Panther Party. Who was it? Hanrahan was the...
Hanrahan, you're right. Hanrahan was a man.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And they actually murdered.
Oh, yeah, they did, because they shot through the wall. Right. And we had a guy by the name of Gloves Davis. He was a black police officer, and he was terrible. Yeah. Gloves Davis.
Right.
Yeah, he was with Hanrahan and going into...
that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, at that time, the Blackstone Rangers.
Yes, they were
in Chicago.
Yeah,
and then the Black Panthers got involved with that. How did that? Was there any?
I remember going to a rally with Reverend Jesse Jackson, because one of the preachers in his alliance or whatever in his group there said something about the way the Blackstone Rangers were doing. Now, you got to know about that Blackstone Ranger, because that went pretty deep. There was monies to be given, and Stone was a big insurance man. He gave the Blackstone Rangers money for whatever reason, I don't know. But the Blackstone Rangers were doing nothing but selling dope. They were intimidating people and all of that. But one of the preachers in Reverend Jesse Jackson group made remarks about him, about the Stone. They burned his church completely to the ground. Yeah, yes, sir. So, but there were elements working with the Blackstone Rangers against the neighborhoods. I mean, why Mr. Stone, the big insurance man in Chicago, gave the Blackstone Rangers money? We never know. Yeah.
Yeah, there was also some suggestions that eventually the Mark Clark and the Black Panther Party would have an impact upon trying to stop some of the gangsterism of the Blackstone Rangers and other gangs.
Yeah.
Were you familiar with any of that taking place?
No, I wasn't familiar with that. I wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah, those were.
But I do know, sir, that they were so different. I mean, there was such a difference, and because I remember the Black Panthers tried to help the young kids coming up. Right.
That's right.
But I don't ever remember them, the Blackstone Rangers, trying to help anybody like that.
Right. This period, 65 to 70, there was a Black Power convention. Well, it may have been 70 or 71 or so, a Black Power convention there was one in Chicago, there was one in Newark, I believe, and then, of course, the political, what do they call it, the Black Political Conference that was held in Gary, Indiana. And all of these things are taking place, and this is right after the death of Martin Luther King. When Dr. King was assassinated, how did that impact on Chicago? What happened in Chicago?
Oh, we all felt, even if we weren't completely involved in the civil rights movement, we just felt a loss for Dr. King. I mean, everybody was hurt. It was like was when Roosevelt, maybe when he died. I mean, I remember the people were sitting on just crying and carrying on, and the same thing with Dr. King. You just wouldn't believe it, but I think he kind of warned us about what was going to happen to him. I think most of us were kind of prepared. Many of us were as to his death. But we didn't think it would be so rapid, one right behind the other, like Bobby and we just didn't believe that America would do that to us, and they're still doing it to us. Right.
But it did happen.
Yes, it did happen, right. But, Doctor, I want to tell you a little bit about Indiana. I moved to Indiana, Gary, about four years ago. After I had retired from my work for the Board of Education in Chicago, I moved to Gary, and it was a little wooded area there, nice and quiet, deer, ducks and geese, all around, and I was just tired of listening to the sirens all day and all night where I was living at 84th and Cottage Grove, and I moved out there, and I volunteered for the police department. After a while, they gave me a job. The government gave them some money, but that is something. I got to read to you one day about this poem that I've written about Gary, because all the whites left. They left the buildings, they left their businesses, and moved down the road what's called Maryville now. And all these dilapidated houses are still there. Dope is rampant. Our homicide rate is higher than higher than Birmingham. And we only got 116,000 people there, where you almost have got 1 million here. But our homicide rate is something else. We got guns coming from everywhere into Gary. Dope is rampant. But that is a place.
So you were moving out to get away from.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, that's why I decided to come back here. Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that you sold
cosmetic
beauty supplies. And you remained there about 3 years. What did you do after that?
I got a job in the maintenance department for the Board of Education, and I stayed there until I retired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And did you work at a particular school? Or?
Yes, I worked at a particular school. In fact, I worked at a couple of schools, maybe 3 or 4 schools. Where you go from, I was what's called a roving crew. That is certain things that their janitors couldn't do, like the lawns or the trees or whatever that we did that. We call it a roving crew. But after I retired from the Board of Education, I volunteered in the classroom for 5 years to help the kids. And I would read my little poems to them or whatever, and try to help, until the Board of Education says we can't have the MEMH. We can't put them in a special class, so we have to put them all together. And that was a bad thing. After that, I had to get out because the kids were those EMH kids were,
What are EMH?
They're emotionally handicapped.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was just something, so I left there.
You had to give it up at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you write poetry?
Oh, yes.
Okay. How did that start?
I don't know, Doctor. It was just from what I saw as a kid in Birmingham, like house rent parties, like the 2 and 3 room houses, shotgun houses, and the roofs or tin roofs, and rain beating around on it every day. Oh, just what I saw. The people going to the welfare store and they're coming like groups, merging into a big stream going there, and how bad we were treated once they got inside there. How the man would throw the food at us, And All those things, my childhood. I saw it. And
You have a poem there that you would read to us?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, just one second. I brought this because I thought you might like this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, here's one, Doctor. It's called We Done Survived. Let me get my glasses here.
That's about life, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Pock-marked and bloody, it was a mean old road we done come down. Planting, picking, and pulling, toting another man's load. Work morning till night, clearing infested swampland, planting and cutting sugar cane. Broken, tame wild horses. History don't even know our name, but we survived. Built a big house with spiral staircase and ornate doors, while the master practiced the refined art of living on hand and knee-polished floors. Hand-carved beds with canopy high. Made the mattress would send it down. We slept on bags of corn shucks and moss on a cold, cold ground. We butchered the hogs and cured the meat. All we got at Christmas time was the skin, the guts, and the feet. But we survived. Back alleys, dusty roads, wash sheds, shotgun shacks. Saturday night breakdown. Catfish, pig ears, pig feet, and 25-cent bottles of homebrew. Keep out the undertaker, boys, and I'll keep out of jail, says the big boss man. Fist fight, razor slashing, bodies gutted like hogs on a killing floor. Come Sunday morning, a sweeping tide, washing away the blood of Saturday night, calling sinners to take their place on the mourner's bench. And through it all, we done survive.
That's deep. That is deep. Read another one to us.
Okay. This is called Traveling Man. He was a traveling man. He was a fireman for the L&N line. He's gone now. All he left was a good name, a gold watch, and a chain. 35 years, still pounding steel. Can see him now, bowed and bent. Work hard like the rest. Cussed a system because of color paid him less. White against black, black against white. The rich man's scheme. But he held fast to a worker's dream. As a child, I sat on his knee. He spoke of things never again he hoped to see. Along the track, black man swinging from a tree, while demons in robes of white danced in ecstasy. Night riders terrorized the countryside, lit the midnight sky. Black, bleeding hands reached out, asked the reason why. Nightbird answered their cry. Each July, they rang the Liberty Bell. Some it was freedom, other it was living hell. Bellowing clouds filled the sky, reflecting cotton fields below, while ragged figures pulled sacks of misery down each row. Well, diesels came to the L&N line, no more shoving, just to sit and make your time. Grandfather was taking off his run, given a job in the yards. A short time later, he was dead, died of a broken heart. Whenever a train whistle blow, I see black faces, sweat dripping from every pore. Home of the brave, land of free, only words that mock me.
What's the inspiration for your poetry?
I don't know. I just know that I wish that I had an education that I could have been, maybe I might have been somebody near some of the poets that we have today, you know, Langston Hughes or some of those great.
Well, have you ever thought of publishing your?
I have thought about it, and I said, once I get down south here, I said, I'm going to try to get me a proofreader and try to get something published. Yeah.
That would be great, because, I mean, that's life.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That is life. And as I said, nobody can write that but you.
But you're right. I saw it.
Nobody has that experience.
I saw it, Doctor. It was something. Yes, Lord.
That is great. So you decided then to, after how many years? 4 years in Gary?
Right.
To come back.
Yeah, I have a cousin who lived in New York City, and she worked for the Columbia University, and she was working in the department where they get the doctorate and PhDs or whatever. And she decided she wanted to come back because we all was raised in Birmingham at an early age. And she decided she wanted to come back. So we got together, and we got a house out in Midfield. So we live together there now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Were you ever married?
Oh, yes. My wife died about 15 years ago, so I never remarried, no.
Yeah. Do you have children?
I have a stepdaughter and grandchildren, yes.
Right.
They're in Chicago.
Yeah. So you've been back to Birmingham now for
about 6 months.
6 months. How has that transition been?
Well, it's a little hard getting adjusted to it, but only from the point that I miss my friends, you know, that being there all those many years. But I'm adjusting. I'm getting ready to join Antioch Baptist Church over here.
Okay, well, that's great.
Yeah.
It's great to have you back.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, we know that you're volunteering here.
Oh, yes.
Too.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate
that. Yeah. Doctor, I'm really happy to be back. You know, one of the things that I thought that when I come back that I would see some of my old landmarks, but nothing is here. They're all gone. All my landmarks over on the south side there.
UAB has taken
everything. UAB has taken everything.
Yes. Well, I really want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule, and you've been very enlightening. You helped an awful lot.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, sir. Yes, sir. I'm glad to be of service. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.